Hi, my name is Dr. Alvaro. I'm a professor of philosophy at the City University of New York, and I just published this little book entitled Raw Veganism: The Philosophy of the Human Diet. In this book, I argue that we have been disciplined into believing that we have to cook food, we have to eat rice, pasta, bread, we have to eat all sorts of cooked food. But in reality, the food that is conducive to our flourishing is the food that nature made for us and the food that we are adapted to. And it's not a mystery to know which food that is. It's fruit and also some tender leafy greens. That's the food that is most beneficial to us. Just because we can digest full cooked meals doesn't mean that that food is beneficial to us. But in this book, I don't just rant about the food that you should be eating. I talk about ethics. So going through the table of contents of my book, the first chapter I talk about veganism and ethics. This is a very important topic because too many people want to become vegans, but they don't have a point of reference, a moral point of reference. So in this chapter, I discuss why you should be a vegan, on what basis you should be a vegan, and also discuss the arguments for veganism or vegetarianism that have been proposed by many philosophers before me, and I argue that those strategies do not work. In the second chapter, I talk about the fact that animal suffering has been used as an excuse for becoming vegans or vegetarians. Don't get me wrong. I think suffering is important, and I do think that animals suffer. But as the title of my second chapter suggests, there is more than animal suffering. So in this chapter, I discuss why you shouldn't focus so much on the suffering of animals in order to justify being a vegetarian or vegan. In a third chapter, entitled In Vitro Meat, I discussed the morality of in vitro meat. Essentially, here's the story about in vitro meat. Ethical vegans say if the meat is not derived from the suffering of an animal, if the meat is not derived from an animal itself, but from an in vitro process, so the meat is synthetic, there's no animal suffering, I can eat it, right? And that's the reason of my second chapter, that animal suffering is not all that matters. There are the things that matter. Well, in this chapter, I'm not going to explain the whole argument, you have to read the book, but in this chapter, I argue that vegans, even vegans, should reject in vitro meat. Even the idea of cloning meat and making meat in a laboratory. In the fourth chapter, I explain what veganism is, what it is not, and what it should be. In chapter 5 is the main chapter of the book, where I argue why human beings should eat raw food, but not any kind of raw food, fruit and tender leafy greens, with the addition of occasionally some nuts and seeds, as long as they're raw. In chapter 6, I talk about a very important topic, and that is abolition and education. They go hand in hand. So, what I argue there is that we have come to the point where the impacts, the global impacts of the meat industry and animal-based diets are destroying the environment. And I don't have to tell you about zoonotic diseases because right now we're in the middle of the craze of the coronavirus. And you know where coronavirus comes from. So my point is that because people insist that meat and animal products are part of our lives, we have to pay the consequences. We get sick. Not only meat eaters, but also people who don't eat meat. And so because of the enormous negative global impacts caused by the meat industry, the dairy industry, and animal-based diets in general, it is time, I argue, that we have to put a legal ban on the sale and the production of animal products. Chapter 7 is also a very, very important topic, and that is raw veganism and veganism in general in children. I've heard not only meat eaters, but many vegans say, I am a vegan, but I'm careful with my children. That's just a total misconception. Children are not aliens. They are human beings like you. They do not require meat. They do not require an enormous amount of proteins. That's just propaganda. Children can thrive, like my children. I have children, and they thrive on a vegan diet. And they can thrive even on a raw vegan diet. The human body does not require all these proteins. Here, especially here in the United States, we are obsessed with proteins. There's protein shakes. Where do you get your proteins? You get asked these questions every day. Where do you get your proteins? Well, I don't know where you get your proteins, but I get my proteins from lettuce, from mangoes, from dates, bananas, and so on. Now, if you're interested in this book, I will tell you, if you go directly to the publisher. Publisher is Routledge. This is a Routledge Studies in Food, Society, and the Environment. This is an academic book, an academic publisher. If you buy the book directly from the publisher, when you go to checkout, you may use the code ADC20. ADC20. That will give you a 30% discount. Okay, thank you very much for listening, and stay tuned. Bye-bye.